In the past lessons, you learned that pytest is a guardrail that catches broken backend code. You run tests, they pass or fail, and that feedback drives development. On the front end, we have the same pattern with Vitest. Vitest is the pytest of the front end. Fast, simple, and it integrates perfectly with our Vite setup. Today we will create a component, see it in the browser, then write tests that validates its behavior. When something breaks, you will see both visually and in the test. Let's start by looking at what is already configured. Going to look at our test setup first. Our vitest.config.ts. If we look at that file, look at some of the code here, we can see in our environment, and this environment is for tests to be run in a simulated browser, kind of a headless browser. And then our global, we're going to be able to use some global variables in our total environment, things like describe, it, and expect. We'll see those used in just a few minutes. And then our setup file is here, and src test setup, so we can go over and look at that. src test, let's look at this, and we see that we import the library of the Vitest. So here, if you want to look through this code, you can. And then the last thing is the package. And we'll see here the test, Vitest run and Vitest. So in these three modules, we have the setup that we're going to use to test out our Vitest, test out our Vite, to make sure that it's working correctly, and that, if there's some problems, we'll catch those. And now we're going to create some button components so we can use those in our test. We're going to put these in our shared folder. The reason we're going to do that because buttons can be used in just about any place in our application. So in order to share those among, say if you had you had two PIV loops, in order to share those in those two loops, you would put them in this shared directory, in this components directory. So I'm going to ask you to create the buttons. I'm just going to put the code in here. You have access to the code, so don't worry about that. And then it should pop up here in just a minute. Okay, we have the button here, as you can see. The next thing we have to do is that we want that button to show up in our browser. So we have to change another file here. It's still in the front end, of course. The src directory, the app directory, and then this file here. And we're going to edit that. And again, you'll have this code. I'll put the code in. And it should add that button so that we can render that button to our local host. So you can see right there, it added. You can see it added some code, import buttons from this directory, and so on. On click, does a certain thing. Second button is disabled. So we're going to use those in our test. But you can see how this code was created, and we're going to use that in our test next. You see here, I have a message from Claude Code, and it's updated the file that I wanted, but it also adjusts the path here. And then it said there's a TypeScript error on line 18. And it gives me this message and asks me, do I want to take steps to correct it? I'll pick one or the other. It doesn't really make any difference for our test. But one thing I want to talk about just briefly is that, in your machine, you might have different dependencies or sometimes you might, for the particular code that we have in our test, the test might be slightly different. So we have to move things around from one directory to another or something like that. We can't keep everything just precise. So if you run into these problems, usually they're not going to be severe or anything like that. So just ask Claude if it's something that Claude doesn't correct automatically, like here. You can ask Claude to correct you, give you some opinions, give you some correction on how to fix a particular problem. And so here, I'm just going to pick number 1 and let it do its thing. Okay, but this is something that you're going to find. It's not a problem, but it's something that's going to crop up time and time again as you go through this course, or you go through this series, or you go through you're doing any coding. You're going to have situations where things are not going to match up 100%, and you have to move something to a different directory, or you have to import something, or something like that, because what the code might have and what the test that you're running, they might have different directory. They might be pointing to different directories. It might be maybe something wasn't imported in the test that you're running. You're asking it to do something that is a little bit different than the code. But all these things can be, fixed based on the problems. Just ask Claude Code to help you through it. Both of these things should be minor, so don't worry about it. Okay, we see the local host here, and in our vitest.config.ts, it tells us that the server is going to be on this port here, 5173. And we have the button demo that we added to our file. And if you look here, if we click on this, you can see that it's counting through. And this button is disabled. Okay, that's, again, some simple examples, but you can see how we set this up. And then we're going to introduce some errors in here and see if we can catch those errors. Here we're going to add our button test in the same directory as our button. Remember, we keep everything together. In our features, you remember that we have directories, and another thing that we have in there are tests. We try to keep everything together in our directories so we don't lose sight of where things are. So we're going to just paste this in. That's our code. Again, you're going to have access to that. And let's go ahead and run. So we're going to create and then we're going to run it, hopefully. Going to follow the instructions here. Okay, it's created. Now it's testing. And basically it's doing what I just showed you to make sure that everything is working correctly. It rendered the children direct. It did not call the on-click. So everything is working as we anticipated. And this is the kind of thing that in the ways that we operate with this particular structure, we put everything in the same directory that are related, unless, of course, it's shared. But in this case, the button test is along with the button creation here. And then we can run our test and see if things are operating like we expect. Again, these are fairly simple things, but hopefully you can see that no matter what it might be, you would check each thing, and then if those things check out, then we move on to the next step. Okay, now we're going to introduce an error in one of our buttons. We'll do that. We're just going to, again, don't worry about the code, you have that. And it's doing this thing. So it's demonstrating you're removing some feature. If we wanted the button to operate in a particular fashion, and that's not going to operate in the way that we thought. So it said the test caught the bug. The button looks disabled, but without the actual disabled attribute, click still fire. This is why tests matter. Visual styling alone doesn't prevent the click. So we have to make sure we have the actual attribute. And we can see now our buttons again. If we click here, this is still working. But now if we click the disable button, it shouldn't do anything. Okay, this window popped up and said it's clicked. That shouldn't happen because it should be disabled. So that's a problem. So the thing is, we're just trying to introduce a problem to show that if you don't have some guardrails, that things can go wrong. Things don't work exactly like you want them to. Now we're going to run the test in our simulated browser. And we should get an error message, some indication of a problem. Okay, yeah, we can see it right here. We still had everything that showed up exactly as we thought. And then this, when clicked worked, but then this should not work at all. This should be disabled, but we get a message. So 2 things passed and 1 failed. So we saw that on our browser as well. You can also test custom hooks. Hooks solve a significant problem of making stateful logic reusable between components, which was historically hard using traditional class patterns. In class components, logic tend to become tangled and unstructured as the component grew in size, mixing unrelated concerns across different lifecycle methods. This made testing, debugging, and maintenance more difficult. With hooks, developers are allowed to extract and encapsulate stateful or side effect logic into standalone functions. Reusable logic can be utilized across multiple components without changing the component hierarchy. Custom hooks enforce a crucial separation between the component's functional logic contained within the hook and its visual presentation contained within the component's returned markup, leading to significantly cleaner and more scalable code bases. And we see we're going to create a hook here, and we will see these, here the hook. Okay, we see a hook here being created. And now we're going to create the test. And we should see that as well. And we're going to run the test. And we could do the same thing. Okay, all tests pass. Both user counter tests are green. So it starts with an initial value and then it increments the count. And I'm going to show you this in the browser in just a minute. But we can see that the test that's run within the headless browser, all the tests shows that everything is working correctly. Now we can do the same thing we did with the buttons. We could introduce an error. I'm not going to go through that here. You can do that on your own. But you can introduce an error and then, of course, correct it. Kind of go back and forth and see what kind of results you get. So we see the counter here on the demo, and we can increment it. And we can go back and we can reset it. It seems to be working very well as the test indicated in the simulated browser. Let's recap. Vitest is the front-end pytest. Same feedback loop, different syntax. React testing library tests from the user's perspective, what they see and how they interact. Today you saw both sides. The browser shows what users experience. The tests catch bugs automatically. When the button looked disabled but wasn't, the test caught it. That is the guardrail. When Cloud Code writes components, it runs tests to verify its work. Failure tells it what to fix. Same self-correction loop as the backend. As homework, you might try to create more components, maybe loading state, error state, or card. Show them in the browser. Write tests, break them, watch the test catch the bugs. In lesson 11, we will build an API layer that connects front end to back end. Don't miss it. Subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Also ring that notification bell so you will know when lesson 11 is published. See you there.